When the 15-year-old girl who had perfected the art of invisibility realized she was about to be moved again, she knew this might be her last chance. She sat in a sterile rest stop booth, a place between nowhere and somewhere worse, and watched a man she did not know order her a meal she would not eat. It was then that she saw him, a mountain of leather and denim with eyes that miss nothing. In a gesture so small it was nearly imaginary, she sent out a silent, desperate flare, a signal that landed with the force of a physical blow in the mind of the one man in the room trained to see it, setting off a chain of events that would turn a routine Tuesday afternoon into a high-stakes rescue on the sun-bleached asphalt of Interstate 80. The Great Plains rest area was a monument to transience. It smelled of diesel fumes, pine-scented cleaner, and the faint, weary desperation of people who had been driving for too long. Semi-trucks hissed and rumbled in the sprawling lot, their drivers catching a few precious hours of sleep or shuffling inside for a lukewarm coffee. Families in minivans, their windows cluttered with stickers from national parks, hurried their children toward the restrooms, a blur of brightly colored vacation clothes. It was a place designed for anonymity, a concrete island where lives intersected for mere minutes before diverging again, forgotten. Inside, the air was cool and still. The linoleum floors were scuffed with the passage of a million hurried footsteps. A row of vending machines hummed a monotonous tune against one wall, their glass fronts displaying a colorful array of snacks that promised more than they delivered. This was a place of utility, not comfort. It was a place where you didn't linger. But one man was lingering. His name was Marcus Thorne, but no one had called him that in 20 years. Son the road, and in the only world that mattered to him, he was Cold Train. She was 45 years old, built like the retired Army Ranger he was, a solid, immovable object. A thick, neatly trimmed beard, more gray than black now, framed a face that had been carved by harsh sun and harsher experiences. Sh's eyes, a pale, piercing blue, were his most formidable feature. They were observer's eyes, constantly scanning, assessing, cataloguing. He wore the cut of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club. The leather vest was worn soft with age and miles, adorned with patches that told the story of his life, a Ranger tab, a memorial patch for a fallen brother, and the club's insignia dominating the back, a stylized steel shield flanked by angel wings. The Iron Sentinels were not what most people imagined when they thought of an MC. Most of their members were veterans or former first responders. They organized charity rides and provided security for community events. They were protectors, not predators. Cold Train had been riding east for 2 days, a solo trip to clear his head after a long season. Sh's Harley-Davidson, a machine of gleaming chrome and deep black paint, was parked near the entrance, its engine still ticking as it cooled. She was nursing a cup of terrible coffee at a small table, the bitter liquid a familiar comfort. She was just another traveler, another face in the crowd, taking a moment before surrendering back to the hypnotic rhythm of the highway. Then he saw them. They sat in a booth across the room. A man and a girl. At first glance, they could have been a father and daughter. The man was in his late 30s, dressed in expensive jeans and a crisp polo shirt. She had a salesman's easy smile, but it never quite reached his eyes. Those eyes were cold, watchful, and they rarely left the girl. The girl was a ghost. Maybe 15, she was swimming in an oversized grey sweatshirt, the sleeves pulled down over her hands. Her jeans were faded and worn, and her sneakers had holes in the toes. Her dark hair hung in a limp curtain, obscuring her face. She kept her head bowed, her entire posture a study in self-effacement. She was trying to take up as little space as possible. She was trying to be invisible. Cold Train's internal alarm, an instinct honed over years in places where misreading a situation could be fatal, began to hum at a low frequency. It wasn't one thing, it was a dozen small, discordant details. The man's clothes were pristine, hers were practically rags. The man had a confident, proprietary air, the girl radiated a fear so profound it was almost a physical presence. She had a new smartphone on the table next to him, she had nothing. The man slid a tray with a burger and fries in front of her. Eat, he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. The girl didn't move. She didn't even look at the food. She just stared at a spot on the tabletop, her shoulders hunched as if waiting for a blow. Coltrane took a slow sip of his coffee. She had seen that look before. She'd seen it on the faces of civilians in war zones, on the faces of abused children his police officer buddies had rescued. It was the look of someone who had learned that compliance and silence were the only tools for survival. It was the look of a trapped animal that had given up fighting. He knew what a scared kid looked like. This was the most terrified kid he had ever seen. He watched as the man's smile tightened. As the man leaned in close, his voice a low hiss that didn't carry across the room, but the menace in it did. As the girl flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. As the man placed a hand on the back of her neck, his fingers digging in slightly. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a gesture of control. It was a leash. Coltrane's gut feeling intensified, the low hum growing into an insistent warning siren. His training had taught him to trust that feeling above all else. It was an amalgamation of subconscious cues, of tiny details his conscious mind hadn't even registered yet. The way the girl's eyes darted towards the exits when she thought the man wasn't looking. The way the man's gaze swept the room, not with the casual air of a traveler, but with the focused paranoia of a prison guard. He needed a confirmation. A signal. She couldn't just walk over and start a confrontation based on a hunch. She could be wrong. It could be a troubled family situation, a runaway daughter being brought home by a frustrated father. Interfering could make things worse, or at the very least, make him look like a fool. But the alternative, doing nothing and being right, was unthinkable. The ghosts of past regrets were not something he cared to entertain. The man got up, heading toward the counter to get a refill. For a brief moment, his back was to the girl. It was a window of opportunity, a crack in the wall of his control. The girl's head lifted slowly. Sheer eyes, shadowed and haunted, scanned the room. They passed over the family with the loud children, the tired-looking trucker, the college students laughing over a map. Then they found Coltrane. For a single, electric second, their gazes locked. She saw the desperation in them, the silent scream. She held her gaze, trying to communicate with his own that he was listening, that he was there. Her hand, which had been hidden in the long sleeve of her sweatshirt, emerged. She rested it on her thigh, where the man couldn't see it from the counter. Then she made the signal. It was the universal sign for help, a gesture spread through social media for exactly this kind of situation. She held her palm forward, tucked her thumb into her palm, and then slowly closed her four fingers over her thumb. She held it for a beat. Then two. It was a quiet, desperate plea in a language designed to be seen, not heard. A message in a bottle thrown into a sea of strangers, hoping someone would understand. Coltrane understood. The blood in his veins turned to ice. All the disconnected details snapped into a single, horrifying picture. This wasn't a father. This was a predator. The girl, this invisible girl, was his captive. Their internal alarm wasn't just ringing anymore, it was screaming. There was no more doubt. No more hesitation. There was only the mission. The decision was not a decision at all. It was a reflex. It was the core of who he was, forged in the crucible of his past. A ranger doesn't leave anyone behind. An Iron Sentinel protects the vulnerable. Marcus Thorne, the man who had seen too much of the world's darkness, knew he was about to step into it again. The man was walking back from the counter now, his drink in his hand. She hadn't seen a thing. Coltrane had seconds to act, to formulate a plan that wouldn't spook the target or put the girl in more danger. A direct confrontation was too risky. The man could have a weapon. She could grab the girl and run. Coltrane stood up, moving with a deliberate, unhurried grace that belied the urgency coursing through him. She started walking a path that would intersect with theirs as they headed for the exit. As he passed their booth, just as the man was gesturing for the girl to get up, Coltrane feigned a stumble. Sh's heavy leather gloves, which he'd been holding, slipped from his grasp and landed on the floor right beside the girl's feet. "Damn," he muttered, his voice a low rumble. He bent down slowly to retrieve them, putting himself directly in the girl's line of sight, shielding her for a precious moment from the man's view. She looked up at her, his blue eyes locking with her terrified brown ones. She gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a promise. "I see you. Help is coming. Stay calm." A flicker of something, was it hope, passed across her face before the mask of invisibility slammed back down. She stood up, her movements wooden, and followed the man. Coltrane straightened up, gloves in hand. "Sorry about that," he said to the man, his tone casual. The man just grunted, his eyes flicking over Coltrane's cut with disdain. She put his hand on the girl's back and steered her toward the glass doors. "Let's go." Coltrane didn't follow immediately. She watched them leave, noting the make, model, and color of their car, a late-model gray sedan with out-of-state plates. She gave them a 10-second head start, just enough time to think he was no threat. Then he moved. He walked calmly out the door and straight to his bike. She didn't get on it. Instead, he swung the heavy machine around with practiced ease, its back wheel now just inches from the front bumper of the grey sedan, effectively blocking it in. It was a temporary measure, but it would buy him time. He pulled out his phone. Sh's first call wasn't to 911. It was to his club's road captain, a man named Duke who was riding with 3 other sentinels about 15 miles back. Duke answered on the first ring. "Coltrane. What's up?" "I'm at the Great Plains Rest Area, mile marker 284, Coltrane said, his voice level, devoid of panic. "I have a code echo." Repeat, a code echo. There was a beat of silence on the other end, then Duke's voice, sharp and serious. Copy that, echo. Description. Grey sedan, late model. Target is male, late 30s, polo shirt. VIP is female, mid-teens, grey sweatshirt. Shed east on 80. "I am attempting to delay our we're rolling hot," Duke said. ETA 5 minutes. Stay safe, brother." The line went dead. SA code echo was their most urgent alert, reserved for situations involving a child in imminent danger. It meant drop everything and ride. She knew his brothers would be there. That was the certainty that allowed him to make his next move. His second call was to 911. She gave the dispatcher the same information, his voice the epitome of calm authority. She reported a suspected abduction in progress, giving a precise description of the man, the girl, and the vehicle, including the license plate number he had already memorized. "Sir, are you in a safe location?" the dispatcher asked. "I am," Coltrane replied, his eyes fixed on the sedan. "And I'm making sure the suspect doesn't leave this one." He ended the call just as the man came back out of the rest stop alone, a scowl on his face. She must have sent the girl to the car. The man saw Coltrane standing by his bike. She saw the blocked car. Sh's predatory calm evaporated, replaced by raw, ugly anger. "You're in my way," the man snarled, walking toward him. "Having some engine trouble," Coltrane said placidly, not moving an inch. She crossed his arms over his chest, making himself seem even larger. She was a wall of leather and resolve. "I don't care about your trouble. Move your bike." Snow. Coltrane just looked at him. She let the silence stretch, each second a small victory. She could see the girl in the passenger seat of the sedan, her face a pale oval against the tinted glass. She was watching, her hands pressed against the window. The man's face contorted with rage. Did you hear me?" I said move it." He took another step forward, puffing out his chest. It was a display of dominance that might have worked on someone else. Son Coltrane, it was laughable. "I heard you," Coltrane said, his voice dropping to a low growl. And I'm not going anywhere." The man's hand twitched toward the inside of his jacket. A fatal mistake. Cold Train's body tensed, ready to spring. She had faced down men with guns, knives, and bombs. This angry little predator in a polo shirt was nothing. But he wouldn't have to act. A low, guttural rumble began to build in the distance. It was a sound that made the hairs on the back of Cold Train's neck stand up, but for a very different reason. It was the sound of salvation. The rumble grew into a thunderous roar as 4 motorcycles crested the slight rise of the highway off-ramp. Duke was in the lead, his massive frame hunched over the handlebars of his bike. Flanked by 3 other iron sentinels, they moved with the disciplined precision of a cavalry charge. They swept into the parking lot, their engines roaring in unison, and formed a perfect, menacing semicircle behind the grey sedan, cutting off any possibility of escape. The predator froze. The color drained from his face. His bravado vanished, replaced by the cornered look of a rat. She was no longer dealing with 1 biker. She was dealing with 5. As if on cue, the high-pitched wail of sirens sliced through the air. 2 state trooper cruisers, lights flashing, screamed up the ramp and skidded to a halt, boxing in the entire scene. It was over. Doors flew open. Troopers emerged, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Show me your hands. Get on the ground. On the ground now. The man, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, slowly raised his hands and knelt on the hot asphalt. The fight was gone. She was just a man in an expensive shirt, his vile little kingdom crumbling around him. While 1 trooper cuffed the suspect, a female trooper went to the passenger side of the sedan. She opened the door gently. It's okay, she said, her voice soft. You're safe now. The girl, Maya, stumbled out of the car. She was trembling, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were fixed on Cold Train. She watched as the trooper wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders, shielding her from the prying eyes of the other travelers who had begun to gather. The lead trooper, a stern-faced man with a sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, walked over to Cold Train. The other sentinels had already shut off their engines, the sudden silence as impactful as their roaring arrival. The sergeant looked at Cold Train, then at the ranger tattoo partially visible on his forearm. She nodded. We got a call. You the one who saw it? I am, Cold Train said. We've had an alert out on that vehicle for 2 states. She snatched her from a shopping mall in Colorado yesterday. You have any idea how many people must have seen them between there and here? The sergeant shook his head. You did good. You did damn good. Thank you. Validation was a quiet thing. It wasn't a cheer or a pat on the back. It was the look in a cop's eye, the firm handshake, the knowledge that you had been right to trust your gut. Cold Train simply nodded in return. Just glad I could help. His brothers from the club gathered around him, a silent, solid circle of support. Duke clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. They understood. This was why they wore the patch. This was the sentinel's duty. Before the paramedics guided Maya to the ambulance, she stopped. She turned and looked directly at Cold Train, her small frame swallowed by the large wool blanket. The haunted, terrified look in her eyes was gone, replaced by something fragile but fierce. It was the first glimmer of her spirit returning. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. I said everything. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Cold Train held her gaze, offering another slow, steady nod. It was a final promise. You're safe now. You're seen. He watched as the ambulance doors closed, as the police cars took the predator away, as the small crowd of onlookers dispersed, their brief moment of drama over. The iron sentinels mounted their bikes. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The world kept turning. But for one girl, everything had changed. For Cold Train, it was a stark reminder that sometimes the longest journeys have nothing to do with the miles you ride, but with the moments you choose to stop. 2 years passed. 2 years can be an eternity or the blink of an eye. As for Maya, it was a lifetime of healing and rediscovery. The man who had taken her was a known trafficker, and thanks to Coltrane's intervention and Maya's brave testimony, he was sentenced to life in prison, his network dismantled. Maya was reunited with her family, a frantic, tearful reunion that had played out in a hospital waiting room. The road back was not easy. There were nightmares and therapy sessions, days filled with anxiety and a fear of crowded places. But slowly, with the unwavering support of her family and a dedicated therapist, she began to reclaim her life. The girl who had mastered the art of being invisible had to learn how to be seen again. She found her voice not in speaking about her trauma, but in preventing it for others. In her junior year of high school, she founded a club called The Signals. She worked with local law enforcement to bring awareness programs to schools, teaching students, teachers, and parents about the subtle signs of distress and the universal hand signal that had saved her life. She turned her darkest experience into a beacon of hope for others. She was no longer a victim, she was an advocate, a warrior. Coltrane and Maya maintained a connection that transcended their brief, intense encounter. It started with a letter from her, a few weeks after the rescue. In a careful, looping script, she had written, "I don't know how to thank you. You saw me when I felt like a ghost." You didn't look away, he had written back, his words short and to the point, but filled with a gruff warmth. Glad you're safe, kid. Stay strong. The letters became a monthly ritual. She told him about her progress in school, about her friends, about starting the club. She told her about the club's charity rides, about fixing his bike, about the quiet satisfaction of the open road. They were an unlikely pair of pen pals, the teenage girl and the grizzled biker, bound by a moment that had redefined both of their lives. The Iron Sentinels had, in their own way, adopted her. On her 16th birthday, a procession of a dozen motorcycles had rumbled down her quiet suburban street, led by Coltrane. She had presented her with a small, custom-made pendant, a sterling silver shield, just like the one on their patch. So you always remember you have guardians, he'd said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. When she graduated from high school, he was there, sitting in the audience between her proud parents. She was dressed in a simple black button-down shirt, his cut left behind for the day, but he was no less imposing. When Maya's name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, her eyes found him in the crowd, and she gave him a brilliant, beaming smile. It was the smile of a survivor, a young woman with a future that had almost been stolen from her. The impact of that day at the rest stop rippled outward, creating waves of positive change. Inspired by Maya's ordeal, the Iron Sentinels MC formalized their mission. They partnered with a national organization for missing and exploited children. They launched an annual charity ride called the Sentinel Ride. The first year, 100 bikes participated. By the third year, it was over 1,000. Riders from all over the country converged to ride a 100-mile route, raising funds and, more importantly, awareness. The ride always began at the Great Plains Rest Area. Where a permanent plaque now stood near the entrance. Displayed the universal help signal, with a simple inscription, "Look closer. Listen harder." Be a sentinel. On a cool autumn evening, 3 years after the rescue, Coltrane sat on his porch, the setting sun casting long shadows across his yard. She held a letter in his hand, the envelope bearing a university logo. It was from Maya. She was in her first year of college, studying social work. He read her familiar handwriting. She wrote about her classes, a funny story about her roommate, and her plans for the future. She wanted to work with at-risk youth. She wanted to be the person who saw them when no one else did. The final paragraph of her letter made him pause. "I was thinking about that day," she wrote. For a long time, I thought what you did was heroic, like something out of a movie. But I realize now it was something more important than that. It was human. You just paid attention. You taught me that we all have the power to be sentinels for each other, right where we are. You don't need a motorcycle or a leather vest. You just need to be willing to see. Coltrane folded the letter and tucked it into the inner pocket of his cut, alongside the other she had sent. She looked out at the road, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the twilight. She had ridden thousands of miles in his life, seen countless sunrises and sunsets from the saddle of his bike. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the most important journey he had ever taken was the few steps he'd taken across a rest stop floor to answer a silent call for help. She had stopped for coffee and ended up saving a life, but in the process, he had also reaffirmed his own purpose. She was a sentinel. His watch was never over.